So welcome. I want to start this talk by simply asking you one question. How often do you guys release your mobile apps? Okay, don't worry. I wasn't expecting an answer. I know this is Scandinavia, so I'm from Denmark. No one speaks at conferences. So I prepared up front. I did a little research, and I'm going to share with you the findings of that research. So before I worked at Xamarin and Microsoft, I worked as a software developer, as a consultant for one of the Danish banks. And in that research, in that work, I got to see kind of the insights of how such an organization works, kind of what their release management process looks like. And I was kind of preparing for this talk here at Oslo, and I was thinking about, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of look at Norwegian banks and try to figure out, because you're not going to tell me, so I'm going to look out and find some data for somewhere else. So I started kind of researching first I had to look up what were the Norwegian banks, and then I started researching kind of what are the major banks and how frequently do they ship their apps. And in doing that research, I came across, just by chance, an interesting kind of presentation and slide deck. And what that slide deck was essentially like a survey, a research done by Deloitte, and they were trying to figure out which of the Norwegian banks has the best mobile app experience. So they were talking to customers and gathering data, and then they basically did a score from 0 to 1. What is the best customer experience in a Norwegian mobile banking app? And then you get a rating from 0 to 1. And then I asked myself, so for these, given the ratings, how often do they release? And I found something which I thought was interesting. So unfortunately, at the bottom we had DNB. I'm not from Norway. I'm from Denmark. Is it Den Norske Bank or is it just DNB? Norske Bank. And at the top we had Sparbank Vest. Er det rigtigt? Sparbank Vest, yeah. And these were kind of at the bottom and the top. And then I looked at, well, how many releases did they do since 2014? And DNB had 4 releases, and Sparbanken had 11 releases. Okay, that's interesting. Then I looked at some of the other ones. Handelsbanken, they also had 4 releases. They were also kind of in the lower of this survey score. And then I looked at, I forget the name of this one, I'm sorry, is it Scandia? Scandia Bank, okay. And they had 19 releases. Okay, I thought this was really interesting because it's backing up my hypothesis. Data that supports your hypothesis is always good data, right? But then I asked another question. Okay, so fair enough, this is banks. What if we take the world's best apps, probably being built by the world's best mobile app engineering teams? What did they do? So I just grabbed what are some popular apps that I thought were kind of interesting. So Google Maps, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And then I looked at, these are pretty major apps. Like they have very good app store ratings, and they have a huge, customer base, user base, millions of users essentially, and they have over hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of ratings. And then, okay, what did they do, right? And then the numbers look something like this: 175 releases per year of their mobile app. Well, if you kind of convert this into a release cadence, and you take something like Handelsbanken, well, then they're at something that looks like a yearly release cadence, right? Sparbanken Vest was at a quarterly release cadence, based on those numbers. Google Maps is every 2 weeks, and Facebook is weekly. Okay? So if you compare the least frequent and the highest frequent, you're basically looking at 50x. Like an order of magnitude and then times 5. That is pretty significant. So I thought that is great. This is really interesting. Because the content of my talk is essentially this: you guys should release more often. Okay, so if you are at a yearly frequency, you should try to go quarterly. If you're quarterly, you should try to go monthly. If you're monthly, think about bi-weekly or even weekly release cadence. Okay? that's in essence the content of this talk. I'm going to try to convince you to go and do this. All right, but why? I mean, okay, so I have some data, some scores there from some random survey, and okay, Google can do it. Fair enough. LinkedIn's doing it. But why do you want to do this? Why do you want to shorten your frequency? So, in case you're not kind of already aware of the notion of continuous delivery, which is essentially shortening this release latency, if you wish. Then the primary benefit of that is reduced lead time. So the lead time is the time from someone gets an idea until that idea is designed, coded, tested, and in the hands of users. Now, obviously, if you're going to batch up a bunch of stuff together and then release a year from now, your release cadence is slow. But if you could do a feature and get that out immediately, well, then your release cadence is significantly faster. And that's great, right? Because then you can ship features faster to your users. You can fix those bugs. They don't have to wait a year for a bug fix, essentially. And what it enables you to do, essentially, is get faster feedback, right? So if you have an idea for a feature, you can go and design it and build it, code it, and it's essentially done. But now it's just lying around, waiting for that yearly release. And if it turns out that that great idea you had is not got such a great idea, well, then it's going to take you a year to find out, because it's only after it ships you really find out, right? While your competitors may be already aware of this, because they shipped this feature, realized it was not great, or maybe it was really great, and they knew already, 11 months prior to you. Also, your release process itself is going to be more reliable, because you do it all the time, right? If you do something once a year, you don't know how long it's going to take, you know how many flaws you're going to find. But if you do this let's say every week, well then you better document it, because when that release guy is on vacation somewhere, well, someone else has to release, right? So you better document it, you better make sure it's a flaw-free process. And it becomes just more efficient, because you're doing it more often, so you tweak it. And finally, you just get higher quality. We've all done this, like huge change batched together with a bunch of other huge changes. It's just, you can't reason about it, right? You can't test it, so you ship more bugs. If you do incremental, much easier to reason, much easier to test. So this is good stuff. And I have one more slide, which I really like. It's taken from Atlassian's blog, where they had a blog post called "The Business Case for Continuous Delivery," and it's completely made up, but I love it anyway. So basically, like on the y-axis, you have the emotional state of the team. So if it's under the middle, it's like the team is not doing great. And on the right, you have time. So let's say you're on this yearly release cadence, right? And you plan, okay, I'm going to ship this thing in a year. And then, okay, you do your estimates, whatever, and you start developing. And after a few weeks, you realize, okay, we're behind. But you go, yeah, it's fine. We can catch up later, right? And as you get closer and closer to the target date, and of course, you don't really hit that target date, as we never do, things tend to begin more urgent, right? There's beginning to be pressure from the outside. I thought we agreed that you would ship at this date. Why are you not shipping? Your manager is pressuring you. You start working faster. You start maybe losing a bit on quality, and you're not feeling great. And then you kind of go down this cliff of urgency, and you hit the bottom. And then you actually ship the thing, being exhausted. And this graph was not, it wasn't built for mobile. For mobile, there's an additional low here, just there. And it's because when you're building iOS apps, you have to then package the app and deliver it to the App Store. And then you have to kind of pray to Apple and say, please, dear gods of Apple, can you accept this application that I'll give you for your divine App Store? And then maybe not, they will. And then maybe 7 days or 2 weeks later, it's published, right? So I like to call that the abyss of Apple. It's really the bottom. That's the worst part of it. And I've been there. I remember what it's like to push and then go, okay, what now? Okay, let's see, we ship it, and then we get relief, right? But you start asking questions. What are the users thinking, right? What are the ratings? What is happening publicity-wise with this application? But let's say that goes well, and you can finally have your release party and do your peak of jubilation, but then, uh-oh, here comes the second year of planning, and we're into this again. And this is really how you feel. Like, it's stressful, and then it's relief, and then you go. But most of the time, you're kind of not feeling great. So I think this really hurts team engagement and just work health. And I just love this graph because I've done this, and I know it's true, even though it's made up. All right. So I guess by now, what I've said is not super controversial, right? I mean, we can all agree that that's true. So if that's the case, then I want to ask, what's stopping us? So clearly, we're not all shipping week after week, right? And what's the reason for that? What I hope to do in this talk is to convince you that some of the reasons why you're not doing it, they're completely invalid. They're just not true. It's based on not fact. And other reasons are pretty valid, but there are also solutions to that. So that's what I hope to do here. And you can shout out with other reasons why this is hard, because it is hard. So the first thing that's stopping us is this, right? We just talked about it. The big gated process. Basically, we have to give our application to someone, and then we can't do anything. They control when it's going to be released and if it's going to be released. So if I want to have a cadence, like regular shipping every week, but I have this black box I can't control, how can I have a stable, continuous delivery process? Well, actually, if you look at this graph, it's kind of interesting. So on the x-axis, you have time. So it goes back to July of 2015. And on the y-axis, you have review cycle time. So how many days does it, on average, will it take for your app to get reviewed? And it's true, yeah. In 2015, we were looking at a 1 to 2 week cycle. But if you look at the graph, it's definitely declining, right? And if you look at the red dash at the bottom, you're actually looking at an average of 1 day review cycle. And in fact, there's now talk of the 2-hour review. So being able to publish, review, and get your app in the App Store in 2 hours. So it's not true anymore. Further, there's an additional thing. It's true that if you build an app for a year and you submit it for review, there's maybe a 50-50 chance it's going to be accepted because it's so big. Like there could be something in there that's violating some Apple guideline, and they reject, so you don't know. But if you ship and you get approved, and you ship delta, 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 every time it's going to be approved. So it's not like it's this dangerous thing. So this is not valid at all. This is not the case anymore. Oh yeah, do you know what that is? It's not nice. Well, it's probably nice for the people, because I think it's the Christmas vacation of the people doing the Apple review. And then they come back and they have this big workload. So fine, you can do continuous delivery. Just be mindful that around that time you may not be able to ship as fast as they need their vacation, right? Okay, here's something else, complexity and just novelty. So if you're like many new to mobile app development, there's a lot to learn, right? You may need to pick up new languages, Swift, Objective-C, or Java C# if you're using Xamarin. Some of these languages don't even have garbage collection. They have this weird reference counting stuff. And new tools, IDEs, Xcode, Max, code signing, Gradle, a lot of new technology. And really, mobile comes also with a set of programming idioms. There are ways in which you build those apps, and you have to learn those. There are thousands of APIs. Lots of new things to learn. There's a lot of complexity around code signing and distribution. If you've ever tried to do this on iOS, I mean, I've learned it year over year over year in 4 years in a row, and every year I learn something new. It's just amazing. And just continuous integration is not really mainstream. I think we're getting there, but it's only kind of recently that there are really good, robust tools. And you might not be able to run your CI for your mobile app in your normal CI infrastructure, because you need those Macs, right? You need to configure Jenkins and get Xcode on them. So given all this stuff you need to learn, it's clear that we don't also have the time and energy and capacity to also set up all this CI stuff. So the first bit is completely valid. You do need to learn this stuff. Like you can't just, you need to learn mobile, right? Although with Xamarin, obviously, if you're already C# developer and you can keep using Visual Studio, but you still need to learn, the APIs, and you do need to learn the programming models. But the other two, I hope to convince you today that you don't need to be so scared of. Then there's quality. Like quality and confidence in quality is hard in mobile because you have all these devices, and then they are thousands of them, and they're running different OS versions. They have different hardware and so on, have different screen sizes, and it can be challenging to just test that. It will take time, and your QA cycle might look kind of like this. So you write up your test cases in a Word document. You set them somewhere outsourced for an agency that has the skills and devices available. And then 2 weeks later, you get those Word documents back, and you go and convert those to issue tracker items, and then your team can go fix them, right? But that totally kills your QA cycle time. So I hope also to convince you that you don't need to do that. But actually, the worst, I think, is kind of the cultural aspect, which is basically if you're in an organization where they're used to doing 2 releases per year or 1 per year, then you're faced with a challenge when you go to the release management guys and you say, yo, we're going to do weekly releases. They're just going to give you a bath and kind of kick you out of the room and go back to the waterfall kind of programming model. Well, not programming, development model. But here I have good news. So I was talking about when I was doing consulting at this bank, and at that time it was their first mobile app. And when the team and we got into this, the management, they didn't know anything about mobile. So they basically just put us in a room and say, you figure it out. Here are some Macs and iPhones and Android devices, and do whatever you need to do, just ship us an application. So we were kind of on our own, and everyone else was envious of us because we got all this hardware. But we didn't have to follow any release process dictated by this bank. So that really enabled us to do this. And what I really like about kind of this slide here is that if you take the research I talked about, the slide deck that was evaluating mobile experiences, well then the bank, the Sparbanken Vest with the best experience, they had a slide that was kind of explaining, well, how did we manage to do this? And I'm taking some quotes from this here, and I'm going to read them in Norwegian. So be prepared. Mange flinke folk som bryr seg om kundene og lærer av kundene. Was that good? All right. So I think this means lots of good, hardworking people, engineers that care about customers, and they learn from customers, right? So continuous learning from the customers. And then this one. IT-utviklingsmiljø med autonomi inne I banken. Yes. And that means basically that the development environment for this team was characterized by autonomy, which is exactly the situation I was in. So I know that. I've been there. And then continuously developing lots of small incremental changes. That's what they say made them successful. And that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So I think there's hope in the sense that if you're in an organization where this is not the way we do it, well then sometimes the mobile team can kind of spearhead. They can be the first team that brings this process into an organization that's not thinking this way. So it's an opportunity if you think of it like that. All right, enough talk. Let's do some demo. And actually I did have another slide before I do that. So the demo, have you seen the MyDriving app that was released at the Build conference? Not this year, last year. Oh, good. That's good. Then it's new. So MyDriving is pretty interesting in its own. So there's a mobile app, and then there's a huge kind of Azure-backed infrastructure that uses IoT, machine learning, all sorts of cool stuff. I'm going to just focus on the mobile app piece and continuous delivery for that. But basically, the app, so what you do is you have this sensor you can buy and plug into your car, and that will collect telemetry, like what's your mileage, how much gas do you use, what's your speed, what's your engine load, and it will transmit that via Bluetooth to your mobile app. And then we'll ship that to Azure and kind of do analysis and compare your driver patterns with other drivers. So it was kind of a sample app that was released. So I'll just show it to you. I have kind of a two-step demo here. Let's see, so here we go, MyDriving. Oops, I actually wanted to go from scratch. There we go. So you kind of, you can log in and set up your account. I've set it up in demo mode, so I'm just going to skip this auth. So we have some sample data. And then as you can see, it knows that we are here in Oslo. And you can kind of say, okay, I'm now going to go for a drive, so I'm going to hit record. And then it's saying, you don't have your IoT device thingy that's going to tell me the data. So I'm just going to simulate. And then we could drive around a bit. And then store, and then we can save our trip. All right, and then we get a summary of that trip. That's fine. We can also record our past trip. We can look at our past trips. So here, James Montemagno was driving around Seattle. And you can see here a map, and then I can draw the slider around, and you can kind of see how much fuel did he use, how fast was he going. How much is 30 miles? I think he may be speeding. 35 miles. Okay, you're going to follow that around. You can go into your profile, and you can kind of look at settings here. You can switch over and use like the metric system rather than the stupid imperial stuff. So that's pretty simple app. One interesting thing, let me just shut it down. One interesting thing here is that it's built using Xamarin. So basically you have a shared code base where you can compile this for iOS, Android, and Windows. And what I want to do here is I want to make a small change, and bear with me for a second, where I'm going to change, so you see basically this blue bar at the top. I'm going to change that into black. All right, and then I'm going to bump the app version number here, number 5. All right, looks like a pretty good change. Let me check diff. Yes, that is what I wanted. Commit, black, tint. Push that up. All right, we'll get back to what this is in a second. So that's the kind of the sample app, and we'll, as I said, get back to it. Now let's look at continuous delivery pipeline for iOS app development. All right, so when you kind of read into continuous delivery literature, you may run into the concept of value stream mapping. And a value stream is really just what are the steps that need to happen, like all of the steps that need to happen from an idea until it's in the hands of the user. It's like this lead time. And mapping just means you draw it out as a map. So in your org, there's some kind of process for which you can generate an idea and get it approved, and you go into design and so on. I don't know what that is. It's different in each organization. You need to go and draw that out. But if you look at it from a technical perspective, it's pretty similar across organizations, right? So you probably have your source, and I hope you have your source and source control. And ideally, you have a CI server which can check that out. And when there's a change, you obviously need to build the application and error out if there's a compile error, essentially. Basic stuff, right? With mobile, you do need to build for 2 targets. So that's the first piece of complexity. You can target simulator, which is x86, or you can target ARM CPUs. So a bit of complexity. Other than that, it's standard stuff like you do unit tests, integration tests. Is that it? Are we shipping? Not really, right? If you're fancy, you might even do some automated end-to-end testing of your application. So compile it, run it on an actual device automatically. And you're probably also not going to ship unless at least you do one pass of like manual testing. Some things you just can't automate, or some things you just want to be absolutely sure a human has been through it. Are we done? No. So go all the way to the user. You need to sign the application for distribution in the App Store. You probably need to update your screenshots in the App Store. You need to update your release notes, maybe change some metadata. Then you need to go and upload this signed binary package to iTunes Connect, and then submit for review, and then you got your praying thing. And then 2 hours later, you publish your application, right, with the new stats. But even so, we haven't still shipped to the user, because the user needs to go and update. It's not like a web app where we just push it out. The user needs to pull the update down. And then hopefully you have some way of getting feedback on the change you made, right? So, and that will generate new ideas for experiments, for features, or just bugs, really, or crashes you need to go fix. So if you kind of draw it out all like this, this is kind of what that value stream is going to look like. All right. So if you're tasked, you're the developer. So you're tasked with, give me this value stream thingy the guy's talking about. And you're the developer. So what you do, you go online and you kind of go, okay, I got to set up my CI for Jenkins, for Xamarin. You read, and you watch the video, and you buy a Mac, and you configure the SDKs, and you set up your signing, and you install Xamarin, and you test your scripts, and you set up, I don't even know, you set up your plugins or whatever. Like this is part 1 of the article, by the way. Yeah, and if you make a step here, something's not going to work. You need to create users, you need to set up email. Yeah.
Buy a Mac.
I did say buy a Mac, because on iOS, you can only compile it on a Mac with Xcode. So already there's like, okay, so we have to run our own machine, what, in the office? Okay, so it's pretty daunting, right? But think of it in the same way, like do this incrementally. What is the smallest possible thing you can do, which gives you value and is extensible in the direction you want to go? What is the smallest possible thing? Well, it's probably getting that Mac and getting it to build your application. And then you can start using that. That's value already. You don't have to build the whole thing. Do it incrementally in a continuous way, right? So if you do that, I have maybe a slightly controversial kind of thing here. So if you're starting from scratch, you have no automated testing. You just set up your CI, and you can do just one test. Should it be a UI test, a unit test, or an integration test? Well, I unfortunately revealed my opinion. So in my opinion, if you can only write one test. What gives you the most confidence in the quality of your app? Well, one unit test is going to test some part of some class, essentially, or some behavior of a unit. But one smoke test, UI smoke test, end-to-end smoke test, is going to enable you to test that your app is actually working on real devices, kind of end-to-end, right? So if you're starting now and you just build one, why not do that? All right, so if you have that running, you definitely want to try and distribute, let's say the test is passing, you want to distribute that to some people so they can do manual testing, right? So you can start small and then add things on top of it and get value all the way. It's the same mindset of continuously doing things instead of doing big bang. A quick note on automated UI testing. How many are familiar with that? Okay, not so many. That's okay. So automated UI testing, it exists for browsers, like for webs, and it exists for mobile apps also. It's basically a test, a program that's simulating a user using the application, right? And users, they find controls like buttons and they tap them. They scroll around, they enter text, they rotate the device, they move, they go to Spain and test the application because you have some sort of GPS functionality in the app. But you do that with a program. So to do that, you kind of need an API, right? So here's an example in Xamarin UI Test, which is a framework for this, where you're saying, okay, app, please tap the button called help. So we'll just find, well, just anything really that has the text help, and we'll kind of simulate tapping that. Or app, please wait until you see this element which has the text ink, but if it takes more than 30 seconds, there's something wrong, so I better fail the test. You also need APIs to launch, relaunch, install, reset the application state, so you can kind of start from a clean application state from each test. And then you can add screenshots for test reporting, essentially. Now, if you have these tests, you can then obviously run them on devices. And that's kind of where Test Cloud, which is a system I've been working on for some time now, comes into the picture. So Test Cloud, I'll tell you more how to get access to it later, but Test Cloud is essentially a cloud of mobile real devices. And what it enables you to do is that the cloud is paired with an execution infrastructure, so that you basically give the cloud, here's my app, here are my test binaries, can you please run them in parallel across these devices that I want to test on? And then gather the results, kind of aggregate the data into one big test report, gather screenshots, gather performance data, and then that's kind of one of the solutions to having all these devices in your drawer in your office, and developers are taking them home in the weekend, and you forget to bring them back, and they run out of power, and who has the Samsung Galaxy S? If you put it in the cloud, then you don't have to worry about it. Thank you. And you might think, well, that's pretty cool. I'm going to build one of those. And I'm just going to ask you to please not. So this stuff is extremely hard. We've been doing it for, I guess, 4 years now, and we're not really done. You have to deal with this essentially. So consumer hardware devices running tests, continuously, batteries inflating, instability of ADB, because you don't want flaky tests, right? That's going to kill your CI completely. So make the test stable, but how can I do that with all this crappy hardware? You have to deal with Wi-Fi. You have to deal with setting up parallel execution, gathering the test results. So some people try to do this, and then they go, bad decision. Let me try to go back. We're still working on it. So don't DIY Test Cloud. All right, more demo. Let me check time. It's good. All right, so I want to show you a bit of automated UI testing. So remember this application I showed you before? And let me get this. So remember the thing where I could kind of move the slider around and the car was driving? Well, this case actually has a automated UI test suite this app has a automated UI test suite associated with it that can run every time we make a change, so that we don't have to manually, as humans, go and do that. So I'm going to run one of those here. So this takes a bit of time to launch the first time, but then what you'll see is essentially kind of the simulation of a human using the application. It's going to launch the app, and let me just get the unit test back here. Oops. And it's going to fail because I didn't reset the application. Oh, it's okay. It usually skips auth. So here we're dragging the slider around, and we're asserting that the car is moving around. So with every change, we could kind of automatically run this. We just plug in a device and kind of enable it. And I thought that was pretty cool. So let's kind of find this test. So it's the past trips test. So what does this code kind of look like? Can you read this? Barely. I forget how to set the font. Was it the fourth? Yes, thank you. Let's blow this up a bit. Yes, sorry about that. So this was the test we saw. So we navigate to the past trip, and then from the past trip page, we pick James at Vivace, if you remember. Here we pick James to Vivace, and then we move the slider around, basically. So this is phrased in a fairly high-level manner. It's using something called the page object pattern to organize the tests so they're nice and readable. It's clear what we're testing. But if we jump in at lower level, kind of what's going on here, like to move the slider, it's just like a simple method call, like set the slider value. This is the slider. That's the query that targets the slider. And I want to set it at this number here. So it's pretty straightforward code. Good. All right. So now we can build an application. We can run tests on it. Now I want to talk about setting up a CI pipeline, which is essentially Visual Studio Mobile Center. So what this product is, first of all, it's a preview product. We're still working on it. But it's essentially the intention of the product is make this super easy and super simple and super fast and pleasant to work with. So you don't have to deal with all these things I was talking about before, like setting up Jenkins and buying Macs and all that stuff. So it's CI in the cloud, if you wish. It's going to help you implement a continuous delivery process. That's our vision. So let's go. Okay, go to page. Go to page here. So let's get started for free. So if you do this, you're going to go to the sign-up page, and here it's pretty nice. You can just connect directly if you have a GitHub account. So you're basically signed up and logged in if you have GitHub. You can do Microsoft, other types of OAuth. Now, in my case, I already have an account, so I'm just going to go ahead and log in. So what you see here now is the UI for Mobile Center. Now, there's a lot of stuff here. It's because I have a lot of apps, because I use Mobile Center all the time. But I've made an organization, which is just a grouping, which is a bit simpler. So for here, I'm going to create a new app. And this is like going from essentially just your source code to the CI pipeline, which is build, unit test, smoke test and distribute to manual users. Right, so basically I do add new app. Let's call it NDC 20, what is it, 17, I guess. And in this case, I'm targeting an iOS app, and this project is using Xamarin as the platform. You can also do like just Xcode, Objective-C, Swift, or React. I'm going to use Xamarin. That's creating my app. Now to get started, I can set up my Xamarin app to use these NuGet packages, Mobile Center, Analytics, and Crashes, and then add these, I guess it's essentially a line of code to kind of initialize it. But you don't actually need to go and do this yet. This is once you do, you want to use some of the more advanced features. We can go ahead and set up the build part. So this is equivalent to the big README, part one of the big README, which we only saw part one, but running in the cloud. So my source code is in GitHub. You could also use Bitbucket or VSTS. And now it's kind of scanning my GitHub repos, and I'm using MyDriving. Just connect that. And now it's scanning the branches of this GitHub repo. And I have kind of multiple branches. Remember that commit I did in the beginning of the talk? That was on the master branch here. You see it's 14 minutes ago, I guess, essentially. So now I'm going to set up this branch for CI, essentially. I'm going to target my iOS solution. In this case, I want to do a release configuration. I'll use the default mono and Xcode versions. I'd like to build for a device. And I can either manually just trigger builds using a button, or I can just set it up every time I push. It's just going to automatically trigger a build in the whole distribution chain. So that sounds cool. I'm going to do that. Now, as I said, if you're doing iOS development, you're targeting devices, you do need to sign your applications. Otherwise, that's just how the security models work. So I'm going to upload this to Mobile Center to have it manage that. So I have a development provisioning profile. Dump that here. I have my certificate, which I used to sign. Oops, I dropped it somewhere wrong. Let's go again. And I'll dump that here. And certificates are encrypted, so we do need password here. All right, so that will enable me to build. Now there's a switch here, which is, I want to also run what we call a launch test, which is essentially like a super quick smoke test. It will just deploy the application to a real iOS device, an iPhone or an iPad, and just make sure it doesn't crash, like at launch. That's pretty embarrassing. So that sounds cool, I'll do that. And then I want to set up distribution. So essentially, I pick a group of people I want to send the app to when this is done. And that's it, I can go save. So that's being configured now. I'm kind of provision in the background. Not going to remember this. And you see if you jump into this, essentially what is happening now is we're waiting to grab a build agent, essentially. And we're going to stream the log output of this build agent. So this is actually a Mac machine with Xcode on it running in the cloud. That's building my application now. You don't have to buy a Mac, exactly. That's the whole point. You don't have to buy that Mac. You don't have to, I mean, one thing is buying it. The other thing is actually maintaining the thing. And that's the thing that really costs you. You're going to need Macs anyway because you need them for development, but not for CI. Well, you don't have to get them for CI. Okay, so it's going to clone my code now and restore NuGet packages, all that stuff. I'm just going to cancel this because I don't want to wait for it. All right. Let's get out of here. Let's get back here. So I already set this up for this application here. You see I have a build that's running. It's kind of close to done. We can kind of tag along here. So that's the change I made. I guess it's 17 minutes ago. So it's it changes the color of this bar into black. And you see we're getting this warning that I decided to set up this device testing, and it's going to take some extra time to complete the build. That's why it's not quite done yet. I was hoping it actually was by now. Well, it's only a few minutes and it's done. So in the meantime, I can show you something else which is cool. So if you remember the test I was running here, doing all that stuff, the whole regression test suite, well, I've also set that up to run in Test Cloud, which is a part of Mobile Center. So if we go in here, we can kind of look at our test runs. This is the one that's running now, but I ran one kind of earlier, and it actually found a problem here. So let's click into this test run. So here you see all my tests. The one we were looking at was the move trip slider. And what you see here left are the screenshots. So we said app.screenshot. That becomes a bullet here. So you can essentially see what did it look like on an iPhone 7. And you can trace what was the memory consumption and CPU usage, how much time did this step take. And then you can kind of navigate around here, kind of look at what the application looked like in this. So this ran in the cloud as an end-to-end integration test. You can jump into logs and so on. So this is kind of cool. You're seeing this across essentially iOS, the latest iOS 9x, and all of the minor versions of iOS. So 10.0, 10.1, 10.3, kind of running at the same time. Well, what about this crash thingy? Well, I shouldn't have said that. What about this test failure? Well, that's the piece that's changing the settings from into the metric system. And when we're on the settings page and we tap this, let's go into here so we can see. We tap change to metric. Apparently this happens, which is not so good. So it looks like the application crashed and then the test failed. So now we know it was tested automatically and we're notified. All right. So we can go into the logs here and kind of see the test log essentially, which is what is all the stuff that happened in the test suite. So I can go and debug at which point in time did it happen, what was the error. All right, let's go back for a second. And go back to test runs. And you see the build test, the launch test I did before is done now. So let's jump in and see. So it should have a black bar here, and you see it actually did. So the change I made, I guess it's 20 minutes ago, was built in the cloud, tested in the cloud, and what else? Anyone? Yes, distributed. So we just need to update. I don't want to show you my email, so I was waiting with showing the device. This is an email I got just before. It's saying, hey, release number 9 is ready. This is the app version. Do you want to try it out? So now I'm being a manual tester, within the organization that needs to go and test this latest version. So I can click this link, and I'm going to get to an install page in a second. Yeah, it's a bit slow Wi-Fi, but it's okay. We could do install. I don't know if you saw that what the release, the commit message was actually the release notes in this case. So it says black tint. We go install, and then it says press the home button to check progress. You see it's installing now on my device. So we have the full, like that thing I talked about, pretty much set up in something like 5 minutes. No Macs, no nothing. Man, this is slow. I'll show you in a second. All right, so that was one thing. Let's see. I had 1 hour, right? Which should give me at least 15 minutes more. So I want to say a few things more. So now you have your CI set up, essentially, which is really good. But you might still experience crashes. Like, we're good programmers, but we can't prevent all crashes. So for that, once you have the SDK enabled in your application, we're going to do crash reporting. So essentially, this is going to pick up crashes. And in this case here, you see we have one group of crash, which is essentially, it's like the same crashes. It may have happened multiple times, but this is essentially the problem. So I can see kind of crash-free users and how many crashes per day. And I can click into one of these. And I get now, I don't know if this is intelligible, but I get now essentially the line of code which caused this problem, right? And I got the system extension here. It was supposed to be a reference to Edvard Munch. I guess that's out of context a bit here. But now I can go debug, right, and go fix it, push the fix, get it out there, test it again, and I know immediately. It also does, if you know what symbolication is on iOS, that's essentially what it does. It converts the native crash into a readable stack trace with lines and all that stuff. Then there's analytics. So one thing is you have this application, but once it's out there, how do you understand your user base? How do you understand what they do with it? Are they engaged? How many times do they open it per day? How long are their sessions? What kind of devices are they using? What kind of languages are they using? Apparently Norwegian and English in this case. And what countries are they coming from? Which version of the app are they using? Another interesting kind of question to figure out. So that's tracked automatically just by integrating the SDK. But you can also set up custom events, which essentially you can put in whatever business logic you want to track here, or kind of business events you want to track here. For instance, how many start recording events did we see? How many % of users do it, and so on. And you do this by essentially a line of code for everything you want to track, and then it goes in here. So you kind of get your monitoring. And then a final thing real quick, before I head back to slides, is also push. So once you've figured out that, okay, my users are actually not using my application as much as I want, you kind of want to re-engage them. And one way to do that is push notifications, right? They're not using the app. Let's try to send them a push and get them back in and do something. Now, one problem you run into, for instance, let's assume that you're building an app that's selling things at discount, right? Like, not all users want to buy the same things. Maybe some users want 20% discount on Justin Bieber tickets, and other people want to go to the Munch Museum, right? So you want to somehow group your users into audiences and then send targeted push to them, so you can really engage them. And that's essentially what this is. So a service to send, I haven't integrated SDK here, but it's a service to send push notifications and kind of group them into audiences. So for instance, I've created an audience which is Norwegians, which apparently no Norwegians are using this app. But then I can go and kind of send a notification to this target audience. I mean, assuming the app supports push notifications. So that's kind of Mobile Sender at a glance. Essentially continuous delivery and kind of DevOps as a service. And hopefully it's really quick to get started and something you guys want to try out. Let's see, I want to spend just a few minutes. Maybe it's better to do questions, actually. So let me recap here. It's essentially this. That's the message. Release more often. If you're yearly, quarterly. If you're quarterly, monthly. If you're monthly, 2 times per month, and maybe even every week. And it's not as hard as you think it may be. With that, I'll take some questions, if there are any questions. I can't see anything. Yes. It will be. It's not right now. He's asking about Adobe support. Cordova support, I assume. Not Adobe. Used to be Adobe. Now it's Cordova. Yes.
Your examples were all in Xamarin. Do you support native Objective-C or Java on Android?
Yes. It went a bit quick, but in the setup, I had create new app, select OS, iOS or Android or Windows. We actually have support for Windows. It's coming for Test Cloud also. It's not in Test Cloud yet. So iOS, Android, Windows. And then you pick your development platform. And you do native, which is iOS, Swift, Xcode or Objective-C, or Java, Gradle builds for Android. Yes. Doesn't have to be Xamarin. That's important. Yes. Yes. So you have SDKs for the various platforms. We're trying to every developer, every app, every platform kind of mentality here. Trying to target everyone. Yeah.
For the automatic testing, is that any way possible if your apps
Yes. So he's asking about end-to-end testing. If your app is using some kind of Bluetooth, let's say IoT device, some other device, and you can, when you're running it locally, like you can connect that and do whatever you want. In the test cloud, obviously, we don't have your specific device, so there you have to you can use the automated testing for free, just run it locally with your devices. But obviously, in test cloud, we would need that peripheral device. Yeah. Yep, this one here. Yeah, so code push is also part of this, yes. So yes.
One other thing is performance.
Excuse me.
If you're using these integrated environment to build applications, when you are pushing or you are deploy basically, you're getting lots of JavaScript and lots of libraries all together. So there is some like code optimization that you're only taking the chunk of the code which is being used, and rest is discarded. For example, you have a library, you're using only 2-3 functions of it, the rest like 70% of the code is not used. So this environment that you're building, does it want to like take out code that's being used
Yep.
and minimize it and
Right. So I think if I understood the question correctly, you're asking about basically optimizations. So for some JavaScript tool change, you have something called tree shaking, which essentially will get rid of code it can infer that you're not going to use. It's not something that's specifically supported, but you're gonna very soon you're gonna be able to put in like custom scripts. So you could add a custom step, which is kind of custom script, which does whatever it is you need to do. Depends on what requirements you need to be installed on the build machine, if that's supported. But it's not something we support or don't support. It's not it's something that's unique to your build. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. I want to ask you one thing, if you guys don't mind. I'm doing a survey, and the way I'm doing it is, I have 2 questions. One is, are you going to release more often? Can you show me your hands? Yes, half of the audience. Success. And the other is, do you want to try Mobile Center? More than half, even better. So you guys that we're not going to release more often, but you're going to try Mobile Center, you might end up releasing more often. Yes, okay, fair enough. It depends on...
in industrial, for example,
Yes.
in a certain one, industry where you have many versions of the same product.
Yeah, yeah.
So releasing too often might end up.
Yes, there are definitely industries where you don't want to do this. Healthcare is one.
It's very easy. It's a one chunk of code.
Yeah. I mean, one of the engineers on my team used to work in healthcare, and there was like every time they were releasing, they were just afraid of being torn apart because they did not want change in their system because it screws up their work, the work processes, I guess. All right, send me a tweet or an email if you want to answer the survey or just ask questions. And good luck with Mobile Center. You can sign up with aka.ms/Mobile Center. Also happy to chat if you want to talk more. Thank you.